All right, testing. It's the Uncovery podcast. Oof, voicemail. I do not want a voicemail. I don't like leaving voicemails. I don't like receiving voicemails. It gives me like stress. It used to be a really big deal though to have voicemail. I feel like there was a time where recording the voicemail message on your family's answering machine was such a big thing. And you'd like fight with your siblings over who got to be the voice of the answering machine. Like, you've reached 271, leave a message. And now the idea of recording my own voicemail prompt literally makes my skin crawl. But also I have a podcast where I record my voice every week. So welcome back to the Uncovery podcast. Hello, it's week 2 of the Q&A, Ask Me Anything, eating disorders, mental health, recovery. I'm excited to dive into some of these questions. There are some personal ones. There are some really tricky ones to answer that I think are also really important. So I'm excited to dig into them. This week is actually also Eating Disorder Awareness Week. So we have I think it started yesterday. If you're listening to this on the Wednesday, it started on the 1st of February. And there are some really awesome events and resources that are going on this week. I'll probably do a little post about that or share some over social media. So make sure that you are following Uncovery Pod on Instagram or on Facebook. And of course, always checking the resources page on the website to see what's going on. So yeah, I'll be sharing out some stuff to support that. It's really great. There's some really, really worthy causes. Obviously, you know that the Silver Linings Foundation is very near and dear to my heart. And so if you're thinking about supporting a cause this week during Eating Disorder Awareness Week, it would just light me up. And if it was a Silver Linings Foundation, man, they would put that to such good use. So yeah, big shout out to them and to Eating Disorder Awareness Week, because I care about eating disorder awareness, which is why I do this podcast. Quick, like sort of weekly check-in from me. Have definitely had better energy, better motivation, and I've actually decided to start creating some weekly goals for the more practical stuff. I do really well with lists and I do really well with to-dos, and it helps me to visualize and conceptualize things that I'm working towards, no matter how small they are. So I've started a little list on my phone that, this week I'm going to try to do this, or I'm going to try to get here. Things like increasing food amounts, changing up my food or introducing new foods, decreasing exercise by a certain amount each week is now a goal that I am striving towards, which I'm like already picking at my nails just talking about this because that one's really tricky for me. But I think having tangible goals is actually something that really works for me, because I'm a goal oriented and I like checking things off. And so I'm hoping that will work for me, ingrain some better habits. And yeah, I'll keep you updated as always. Okay, let's dive into the first question then. I had a few that were very similar or related along these same lines. And the first one is, anything to do for someone you know is struggling with an eating disorder but won't talk about it, and introducing, that kind of conversation about somebody that you're worried about. Now, I'm going to go through sort of an abbreviated summary of how best to kind of go about this and some pointers. And then the week after next, in 2 weeks from now, there's an entire episode diving into the entire sort of process, best practices, do's and don'ts, and different contexts for how to approach these kinds of conversations. This is probably one of the most common questions that I get, which is like, what do I do if somebody is struggling? And especially if they haven't admitted or shared with you that they have an eating disorder, but you're kind of watching this. So that said, it's never too early or too late to approach someone is the first thing that I would say. It's important that it happens sooner than later. There's never too early of a time. But if you think it's been going on for ages and ages and you're like, oh, I just feel helpless, I don't know if I can do anything at this point, it's never too late either. Like no one is too far gone to get help. And so just know that any time is an important time to talk about it. And that recovery is super, super possible no matter where this person is at. And a part of that sort of beginning thing is informing yourself right from the beginning before you approach somebody. So understanding the myths and what eating disorders are all about. It's important to know some of that before you approach someone. You can listen to sort of the 101 episodes of this podcast to get more familiar with what's happening for people and how common it is. And, you know, it's even an interesting resource to share if you're opening up this conversation to say, you know, I was listening to this podcast and they were talking about this and this is what I'm seeing. The next thing is to choose a good time. This is tricky because it's never going to feel like a good time. It's always going to feel like an uncomfortable time to bring this up, but sort of avoiding things like doing it in the middle of a meal time or in front of other people or things like that. If there's a place and a time that you're one-on-one with this person and you know that they'll feel more comfortable or most comfortable and it's just the two of you, then that's probably your best bet. That's a good time. Kind of jumping in or intervening at a shocking time in the middle of something could really set people off. I did have someone one time sort of bombard me at an unexpected time and sort of do this bait and switch. And it was like, I felt extremely, extremely trapped. And I know that there are things like interventions, and I know that there are things that like you see on TV and, you know, have everybody come together and then sort of like bombard this person with how you're feeling and how scared you are just to get them to do it. And I'm not an expert on the effectiveness of that. I can only say from my own experience that when I was sort of bombarded in that way, I felt very backed into a corner and I did not react well. It felt like an ultimatum. It felt really, really destabilizing, and it broke some of the trust with the person that had lied to me. So I think I would avoid that if you can. When you're talking to this person, be honest. You're going to have to sort of leave your ego aside, knowing that there's a potential for a bad reaction, no matter how gently or how effectively you kind of plan out to talk to somebody. Explaining your concern, explaining that you're not going to judge them. Tell them what you're seeing. Something that you can attach to that is behavioral. And then tell them how it feels to you to see that happening. You know, like, I adore you. I care about you. Tell them that you love them, how much that they mean to you, and mean it. Like, look them in the eye and say, like, you matter to me. I'm also really worried, and this is what I'm worried about. I know a little bit about eating disorders, right? If you've done your preparation, then you'll know a little bit about, and it is killing me to watch what I think is a really detrimental behavior or set of behaviors or whatever it is. You know, it really hurts me to see what you're maybe going through, but I want to be here and I want to talk about it. And then be quiet. Then listen, right? Give them some time to talk about what they're feeling or what that's potentially bringing up. This is going to be impossible. This is going to feel impossible. But to have somebody approach you in this way can be quite shocking, no matter how comfortable of a situation or how, you know, safe you felt before. It's still going to be very uncomfortable if it's something you've never talked about before, because you're going to know that in their head, they're like, do I say do I say the truth? Do I lie? Do I need help? Do they even recognize it? So give them a little breath to even like take in what you are bringing up and asking, and know that this could now at this point kind of go either way. So you might get denial, you might get acceptance, you might get a lot of resistance, you might get anger. And that's something that you're going to need to be prepared for no matter what, because it matters more to potentially save someone's life than to have everything be glossy and comfortable and have them feel exactly the same about you. Like, you kind of have to put everything on the line in order to save people sometimes. So then it really is about listening and navigating their response just really patiently and really lovingly as best as you can. And you can ask, do you understand why I might be concerned? And do you think maybe you'd be willing to look at exploring how we can make sure that you're well and that you're the happiest that you could be, that there's any changes that maybe could be made? And tell them that you'll be there. I think that's maybe one of the most important things that you can say to somebody is say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for it. And knowing that that's available to them, no matter how you want to go about navigating it, especially at the beginning, is so comforting to know that you're not like rushing them into it, that you're like, look, we can navigate this together. You know, maybe there are resources that we can look at together, or can I help in any way then to move this forward if they're open to that. And then you kind of just take that step by step going forward. There's a few things that I would say to potentially avoid for yourself and for them. Taking on the responsibility of being therapist and being like the only person that knows about it and being their confidant and all of that, that's going to really strain the relationship. As soon as possible, to get somebody to see at least their doctor and then think about talking to a therapist or a professional or something of that kind, the sooner that is possible, the better. Even to just make that introductory appointment or to start exploring, that Google thing that I was talking about, best eating disorder therapist in whatever area, or using the NIDO website together, offering to help together, or to, if they prefer to just like explore it on their own, but I would continue to then check in, because taking on the role of therapist and be like, just talk to me about it is too much for you. If you're not a psychologist, it's going to be too much for that relationship. So supporting is the best that you can do, because you just won't have all the answers as a loved one. Ultimatums are something that I think is really, really tricky and could potentially backfire, that if you don't do XYZ, I will cut you out of my life, or I will not support you anymore. And there's a difference between knowing you yourself, the person that cares, that you have limits as to how long you will basically watch someone self-destruct before having to step back yourself. I 100% support and understand that. But sharing, like, if you don't go to therapy right now, I'm not going to speak to you, is probably not going to get the desired effect. And there are, professional interventionists that might disagree, and they know how to structure that kind of conversation and that kind of negotiation. But I think that's a bit extreme for a friend or loved one to sort of take on. Avoid commenting on appearance and weight. That person is fixating on their body, their appearance enough. And to have it pointed out can be really uncomfortable. And it also could actually support the eating disorder. So in this really messed up way, hearing like, you're really thin and I'm worried about it, the eating disorder is like, yes, we're doing it. We're successful at this. So not only do we know that it's a myth that it's all about the weight, that you can have an eating disorder at any shape or size, and often it isn't what you would textbook kind of think in your head, oh, this like overly skinny, starved person. So not only do we know it's a myth, but it's also like something that the eating disorder actually attaches to. So I would keep it really focused on, I'm watching you do this behavior, or I'm noticing that you're skipping a lot of meals, or that you're really, really running yourself down with exercise, or you're, leaving to go to the bathroom right after me. Like things that you can see, or saying, I'm just concerned about your health, is a better way to go than saying something about their body or their looks. And that sort of goes along with this just general sort of oversimplification of solution finding and being like, look, just eat. Look, I'll eat with you. Like, let's just eat stuff that's larger or more, or like, let's just, it goes back, I think, to the sort of informing yourself at the beginning that it's a bit of a myth that it's just about the food, and to focus on solutions like getting a professional to step in or to talk to the doctor at least, and things like that. So take those small suggestions one at a time and just say, look, I would love it if we could even just get you into your doctor to do a physical and make sure that you're okay. I would call the hotline with you, or I can be there for you. And just these little steps or little gentle nudges in that direction. And then that can hopefully take on some momentum. The next question, and there's two of them that were pretty much the same. And it was, what is the most help or support a loved one can give to someone with an eating disorder? Or how can a friend best help recovery? The very best thing that you can do is to ask the person, how can I best be there? Because everybody will probably need something different. There are different ways that people can be supported, the amount of support that they want or need, or the amount of communication, but asking them outright is such a beautiful way to do that, because it makes no assumptions about what they need. And then it invites them to feel safe enough to ask for something. Because that's often what it is that, if you say kind of like, okay, well, like, let me know if you need anything, I'll be here. It then puts the onus on that person to say, okay, now I know I need something. Now I need to reach out in the exact thing that I need. So it kind of takes that burden off of them a little bit to say, okay, I'm asking you how I can be there so that then I can do it and then do it. Some other kind of just like pointers is like taking diet culture and the talk about weight and shape and the fixation on body and food and exercise, take that out of your own life. I would really reflect on what your own opinions about bodies and health are, and take that piece out. Being willing to ask them about their experience or have those conversations, and that you're not afraid of them, is something that's really amazing to share and to know. Even just, hey, I am willing to have these conversations. I want to understand. That matters hugely, to have someone even ask you, like, how are you really doing? And what is this experience like for you? They may not take you up on it, but just knowing that that's on the table is really helpful. And saying things like, hey, I know what you are working through is impossibly hard. Acknowledging how hard they're working, even when you can't see changes, is just so wonderful to hear, because often you feel like unless you're making really huge physical progress, for example, that nobody is really paying attention, or that nobody is recognizing what's happening. So that's really nice to feel seen and to feel believed in, like, I know that you're going to be able to do this, and I'll support you the whole time. Treat them normally, like treat them like a person in the same way that you would treat them whether they had an eating disorder or not. You interacted with them the whole time that they've had it. Once they are admitting it or in recovery, or about their eating disorder, like, don't exclude them from things by making assumptions, by being like, oh, well, now is it weird if I like invite them to things or that have food, or like just continue to treat them like a normal person and not like a sick person or not like a messed up person. That's really destabilizing to have people like tiptoe around you. Just be you and let them be them. And the other thing really is just meeting them where they're at. People are going to be at different places. They might slip and they might progress, and navigating that is really difficult to watch, but sort of meeting people where they are the only one that can change them. So being understanding that different parts of the journey will look very different. And as long as they are speaking to a professional or staying safe, that's really the most important thing. And so you can hold space and support for them at different points in their journey. Okay, the next question, this is close as well, but what's the best first thing a friend can say when you first open up to them? So if someone shares with you that they have an eating disorder or a little bit of their story or something like that, I mean, first of all, thank you for asking this question. This is a really good question, but just thank them for their vulnerability the same way that you would with any other difficult share that someone gives you. I mean, I think that kind of insight into a person's life is a gift. And I think we need to cherish those when people feel safe enough with us to be honest with us about what they struggle with. So just saying, thank you for sharing that with me. That matters a lot. I know that it would be difficult to be open with that. And I think it's really brave. And then, you can say, if you want to know genuinely more about them, you can ask, do you feel comfortable telling me a little bit more about it or what your experience is? And then tell them that matters to you. And again, you can ask then, is there a way that I can be supportive of this? And how best can I show up? So those are the best kind of first things to say. Okay, there's one more that's a little bit along those lines, but it's a little bit more specific. And it's, I have a few people in my life with eating disorders. How do I approach eating with them in group settings? Should I acknowledge that they aren't eating for some, or when they are eating in groups at family gatherings, for example, and I notice they seem uncomfortable, what's the best approach? I don't want to make either instance feel uncomfortable, but is not saying anything more uncomfortable? And this is a tough one. This is a really, really good question. It's tough. It's going to depend a lot on what your relationship with the person is and whether or not they've shared with you or they know that they have an eating disorder. So if it's something where that they're in recovery or that they're have support systems in place, like psychologist, dietitian, that they're working towards recovery, then just treat them like a normal person. Then I would they might be eating something different. They might be eating at slightly different times. They might be really focused on the food because they're going through a challenging challenge that's in front of them. So then I would just kind of let them be and then just treat them like a normal person. But if it's something like they seem really uncomfortable or they're outright not eating, I would just do gentle invitations to sort of say, hey, is there anything that I can get you? Or do you need anything? Or things like that. Because if it hasn't been something where they're willing to talk about it and you haven't had that conversation that we talked about at the beginning, then pointing it out in front of other people is probably going to do more harm than good. Now, if you know that they are, again, kind of in recovery, some things to remember about group settings or planned meals out or things like that. Often for people that are in recovery, knowing ahead of time what the plan is really important, especially earlier on or in restoration kind of period of recovery. Until that flexibility can be really safely introduced, structure and knowing things ahead of time is actually really important. So communicating what the plan is or where you're going to be eating or what's going to be available to them if you know that they are in recovery is huge. And then not sort of changing things last minute. So having them kind of walk in and be like, oh yeah, well now we're not eating for another 3 hours, or, oh, now the restaurant has completely changed. They might be doing things like planning ahead that they're going to be able to either eat enough or what they're going to have so that they're feeling comfortable. So it's good for them to usually know ahead of time. I know that helps me a lot. So either with family meals or with restaurant going out meals, if I know where I'm going ahead of time, then it really decreases my anxiety about planning around it. Now, it is up to them to be doing things that they're comfortable with and to set boundaries and say no to things that they don't feel comfy with. But generally speaking, even having my mom ahead of big holiday meals saying, hey, what would you like to kind of see on the menu? Or here's what we were planning on having. What do you think of this? Did you want more of this? That is so wonderful when that happens, because it's somebody recognizing, I know that there are particular things that might matter to you in this context to make you feel okay, and I want to help. That's what that communicates. Okay, next question. meditation and yoga relationship with recovery. Yeah, this is another huge one that will likely I'm going to have somebody from the yoga world, I think, come on and talk about this in more depth. But there's a really complex relationship, at least and especially for me, between yoga and eating disorder, body stuff, and meditation. So I have found both meditation and yoga to be incredibly, incredibly healing at this point for me in my recovery. But the way that I came into yoga was extremely disordered, and my attachment of yoga, exercise, and body was really, really problematic for a very, very long time. And that was before I actually even really took meditation on as even its own thing, because they can be you can totally separate meditation and yoga as an integral practice and yoga as exercise. And that's how I treated it, as like intense hot yoga, power exercise. So I do it much more gently now. I have it as an actual stretch. I don't crave in the same way that I did this like intensity of workout. And I've taken huge breaks in yoga as well over the years, but it can also be super healing for people. I find meditation is so helpful when I'm consistent. And this is one of those things where people are like, oh, have you tried meditation? It solves everything. So it depends on the person, of course. But man, it changed my life when I actually started digging into meditation and doing it every day and really understanding what it is about and the recognition of your own consciousness. The impact that has in navigating negative emotions can be huge. So to me, it's a potential really powerful tool. Yoga can be something that can reintroduce gentle movement when somebody's had a problematic relationship with exercise and then is starting to move again in a different way. If it can be done in a way that doesn't feel this like hyper competitive, I must be this power yoga crazy person. So it's complex, and I think for each individual, they'll have to really reflect on like, why am I doing this? How am I doing this? Because the entire yoga space as an industry is actually notoriously bad for the way that there is this Venn diagram between food perfectionism and yoga and this like pure life and this aesthetic of these thin, bendy, perfect bodies on beaches. And that has nothing to do with what yoga really is. And I think that's where then maybe that gets lost in translation, especially in the way that I think the mainstream sort of has pushed yoga in the Western world. So I think if you can really start to understand like what is the purpose of yoga and what is yoga actually about, that's where the magic will really come from. But yeah, the yoga space is actually a pretty toxic place in a lot of ways. And so I'm going to have an episode about that, because I'm a yoga teacher. I love yoga. I'm into it, but I recognize its downfalls for sure. Good question. All right. Speaking of social media, the next question is, what do you think could be done in an effort to change the way bodies are seen in the media? We know that social media and society as a whole has a huge impact on people in regards to body image and eating disorders. So what do you think we could do to change that? Oh, social media. Yeah, we did a bit of this when I had Tam on in the episode Tam for a Change, because that's how I got connected with her, was through social media and Instagram and sort of quote unquote recovery Instagram, because there are sort of these little pockets of sub communities on different forms of social media, and some are wonderful and some are terrible. So I came into the social media recovery space long before I was in recovery. And it was sort of through this health and fitness stuff. And basically I stumbled into it via food fixation. And this was when the recovery space, even on social media, was things like transformation photos and girls eating these like giant volumes of food and never gaining weight, and showing like mirror pictures of their emaciated bodies. And then maybe they would like gain a little bit. And it is so disordered and it was so toxic. And it was basically symptoms of their eating disorder rather than showing anything positive about recovery. That was when I actually came across recovery social media. And I cringed to think of what I would be like if I had kind of gone down that path at that time. Like if I had thought that that was what recovery looked like and then pursued that, because I think it's really, really a bad message to have shared out. Now, I recognize that it is a symptom of the eating disorder, and I do not blame those people in any way because they're suffering, and that is a manifestation of that suffering. So there is that sort of side of social media, which is even the recovery space is tricky. Overall, the fixation on bodies in the media is I'm so over it. I could scream. We need to consciously curate the content that we expose ourselves to. So it's actually an individual decision to change this. The only reason that those photos or that content continues to be present in our media is because we keep clicking on it, is because we keep interacting with it. It's because we keep engaging with it, because then the algorithm pays those sources. The algorithm continues to show you more of that stuff. So it's about sort of stripping back what is unhelpful. Anything that you are comparing yourself to that's making you feel less than about yourself, unfollow it. Get it out. It will totally, totally change your life to move from that type of content to introducing things like a diverse range of bodies. So you can still follow yoga accounts, but maybe you're not following the thinnest yogi on the planet that only eats lettuce. Maybe you're following someone who has a better representation of the diversity of bodies that are in the yoga space, who's in a larger body. There are ways to expose yourself to better messaging, and then that actually perpetuates the content overall. And I think it sort of spills upwards. So that's the best control that we have as individuals to make that change, is to support the diverse set of people that exist and follow them and do that, and not posting stuff that is problematic. But I think from the top down, that's tough. You can't really put policy in place and control what people do. I think honestly, it has to be this sort of organic shift from where we've been to now. So, stop doing body transformation stuff and fixation on hyper fitness. And I think changing the amount of knowledge that people have about the realities of that and that space is kind of the first step to doing that as well. But yeah, let's just move past the body focused chapter of humanity and maybe into the consciousness chapter or something like that. Shall we do that? Okay. That's my soapbox about social media. All right. How has your eating disorder affected dating and intimate relationships? Okay. Okay. It is I'm obviously struggling to put this one into words. I have thought about this ever since I got this question. I have been thinking about it, and it goes both ways. No pun intended. Genuinely is one of the ways that I can describe it, is that the eating disorder impacts relationships, and relationships can impact the eating disorder as well. So in the first instance, how does the eating disorder impact relationships? It happens in a couple of different ways. There is an intrinsic link between the reasons that a lot of people have eating disorders and the reasons that they might end up in certain types of relationships. But if you're in a relationship or you're dating, something that I have experienced on one hand is avoidant behaviors. So very short relationships that are kept very much at a distance. And that sort of behavior is a mechanism for keeping people away from your eating disorder, because you have to have your eating disorder. You can't get rid of that, but you don't want someone to get close enough to you to really be able to see what's going on. So the people that I dated sort of in my 20s that were probably the most keen to treat me well and to be great partners. I ran from all of them because it would get too intense. And it wasn't even that intense when it got too intense. It'd be like somebody asking me to be their girlfriend. And I'd be like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I would sort of push people further away, because if people get too close, then they'll see you for who you really are. And I think people experience this whether or not they have eating disorders or not, but it's really impossible to keep your eating disorder a secret and have someone be really close to you when you haven't even admitted to yourself or anyone else that you even have one. It's different if you're in recovery, because you can get to a point where you're open to share, look, this is something that I'm working on. It's important that you know this about me, and here's what I go through. And then they can sort of be a part of that journey if that's appropriate and if that works. But if you're not even admitting it, then having someone find out is like the worst thing that can happen. So you end up running basically from relationships, or at least I did. Now, the other part of that is that then you end up chasing after relationships that are not good for you. It makes you potentially really susceptible to poor treatment, toxicity, emotional abuse, because you're not well and you're not whole and you're not able to be your best fulfilled self. So it actually can trap you into unattainable partners that are emotionally unavailable, and to do really toxic cycles of that. Because you're not confident in yourself, or you don't love yourself enough, or you're not taking care of yourself enough. How can you possibly value yourself enough to demand treatment in a good and quality whole relationship if you can't do that for yourself yet? So that's another way that ends up happening. Now, especially in those sort of more toxic or problematic or unideal types of relationships that you might find yourself in, that will have a direct impact on the eating disorder itself. So that reciprocal relationship that I'm talking about, our emotions are impacted by our relationships, and our emotions are coped with by using eating disorder behaviors. If we have eating disorders, usually that's typically it. So if you are completely destabilized in your relationship, or you are at an emotional valence that is really strong and negative, then you might increase those eating disorder behaviors, or it might get really riled up. And this is something that I have, upon reflection, because during the time you don't really put this stuff together, that correlation is so clear to me. So when I've been in relationships and they've been at a place where I felt safe and I felt loved, and I was willing to do things in my recovery that I wasn't in other places. So it felt freer, it felt safer to try things that would usually be difficult. But when I've been in relationships or situations in relationships that were really hurtful, my eating disorder went chaotic. So I can tie times that I've been at my absolute lowest to times that I've been in really volatile periods of relationships. And so it's clear to me that directly impacts the eating disorder in a really, really negative way. So in some cases, you may have to leave relationships or see big shifts in relationship throughout recovery, because as you're having these realizations for yourself, you're needing to change your life around you, and things are not making sense anymore. Also, if you change the dynamic of a relationship, or you improve your situation or get out of a bad relationship, then you can actually start to focus on recovery. Because if you're held in a really negative space, you're never going to be able to really fully recover, because you're so tied into this emotionally toxic place. So those are the sort of relationships between dating and relationship, and relationships with relationships and eating disorders, I guess. Sex is obviously a part of intimacy and relationships, and a huge, huge impact on, I think, a lot of people sexually. Oof, here we go. Now we're getting real. Because of the fixation on body and weight and body image, it feels obvious to me how that would then impact somebody's intimate or sex life. Definitely have experienced that. So being a partner to somebody, or a potential partner, or dating somebody that has an eating disorder, it's possible to date in recovery. It's not necessarily going to be simple. Everybody has stuff that they're going through. To me, it has to do with the willingness to be a support without a caretaker, and just being a person that cares enough about this person to kind of walk through that as they do. And you can't have a secret eating disorder and a relationship. You can't keep your eating disorder and ever get to a really whole place in a relationship. I believe that. I believe people try. I believe many people do for a very long time, or they appear to. But it is impossible to have a real full relationship and hang on to your eating disorder forever. You have to let it go, because you're then in a relationship with your eating disorder, and it's like this really fucked up polyamorous situation where you're still dedicated fully to this thing, and trying to maintain a real relationship too. So to me, you can date, of course, in recovery. And if you've, taken steps to making yourself well and you're doing that, then yes, of course, you're not just going to have to wait until you're fully recovered to ever have a relationship. Of course not. But there's such a mindfulness that has to go into that about where you're at. And again, just talking about it is the best thing that you can do. Bring it up. If this person is open about it with you, then decrease that fear, put that fear aside and say, look, communication is the hallmark of relationship no matter what. So this is no different. And it's no different than any other mental health thing. If you had anxiety, if you had ADHD, if you had depression, if you have borderline personality disorder, though, you're going to have to talk about it with your potential partner if you want to have a really honest and true relationship. And so this is no different than that. Plus, there's stuff that is totally going to come up just in a very practical sense with eating disorders about how can I support you during, meals if you're in recovery, or is there anything that you need from me, or how can I be there as you go through this, if that's something that you've decided you're both capable of doing. And, you have to be willing to have those conversations. That's really all that it comes down to. It's not this terrible, dark thing that nobody in eating disorder land ever has relationships. Plenty of people are married, have children, have relationships, tons of it. But it's tough to balance all of that out. And if you're trying to do it while maintaining it as a secret, I just see that as so incredibly impossible. At least for me, I always just found it a lot easier to run away, but that was before I was ever admitting to myself even that I had one. So that's a long-winded way of answering that question about dating and relationships. And I'm actually having a dating and relationship and eating disorder recovered coach come on the podcast in a couple of months, so we can talk even more about dating and body and all of that stuff. Okay. So the last kind of question, it was two questions that are kind of similar, but it was about tips around, challenges during the pandemic and isolation, injury, coming down with COVID, and that struggle with eating and things like that. And it really taught me a lot about rest and the conflict between wanting to get stuff done, the inability for me to take rest while sick with COVID, or, over the course of the pandemic, which if you listen to the COVID episode, definitely came up. So that sort of shift in your life in a very real way is very, very tough because of COVID and lockdowns and all of that. And then when you're sick and you can't move and you've had this fixation with exercise or food or keeping your body a certain way, like letting go of that, it is impossibly difficult to wrap your head around that. So it has actually been really good practice for me this last month to embrace the need to rest. I have not necessarily been comfortable. I've been quite down as a result, as you've heard. But I have been forced to confront just how important rest is. And the more that you do it and the more that you practice it and realize that you don't die, that like everything turns out okay if you take the day off of exercising, if you lay on the couch until you create a divot in it, like that's okay. And nothing bad is going to happen. And nobody loves you less. And all of the things that you've told yourself about it, in fact, are not true. So it's almost this, you have to prove it to yourself and you have to do the hard thing and get through it and then see, wow, nothing terrible happened. But I think it's been really common for people that get sick and are used to exercising or are used to going out a bunch more to have to lock down, to have this isolation in COVID. It's a real mental struggle. So injuries is the same thing. So whether you're laid up because you're sick with COVID or you're laid up with an injury, it's going to have the same sort of detrimental mental effect is, oh, well, if I hurt my foot and I can't run, what will my body do? And this catastrophization of our future self. And it's the same thing in eating disorder recovery. As we increase our food, as we decrease our exercise, or we stop messing around with ourselves and just see what our body will do, not knowing what it will do is totally destabilizing. But that's the key is we're working towards letting go of that need to control. So it is tough, but it is a matter of practicing it, getting support around you, talking about it. If it's a therapist, if it's a friend that you're safe and, comfortable talking to about these things, just to have them validate and have them maybe even repeat back to you the things that you're saying, to hear what it sounds like when someone talks to themselves like that. Would you ever listen to a friend and say, yeah, you're right, you should be really stressed about being sick and sitting on the couch while you're sick because like you're going to blow up like a balloon and be useless? Like you would never say that to a friend. And so why would you say it to yourself? Things like that I find help. All of the sort of support systems that I have in place, I really, really had to lean on, especially coming out of being sick. When I didn't have enough energy to even like go to therapy or go to my dietitian, I noticed a huge mental shift negatively. And then when I did have that energy back to even have like a Zoom session and talk to my peer mentor, it came back very, very strongly that I was like, okay, this is how important staying consistent with this stuff is, because that's really how we get through it. So those are the kind of challenges in the pandemic or isolation and injury that come to mind for me as well. And so that's our final question of this kind of series of Q&A. And again, this was long and it's going to lead to some full episodes talking about, I think, those conversations about approaching somebody and especially the dating and relationship stuff, because I'm not an expert in that field. Although I have a lot of firsthand experience. I'm not a professional dating coach. But yeah, that's what's going to be coming up in the next few weeks. And you can keep submitting questions to me, either through the website or message me on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that, because I'll still kind of collate them and answer them as they kind of come through. So would really also appreciate a rating and a review on Apple as we kind of like ramp these up and get more into the flow of these regular episodes. It's ever more important to have this kind of go out to as many people as possible. So like it, share it. I appreciate the support so much. And I'm just so glad you're here. So we will see you next week on another episode of Uncovery.